Every year, thousands of people with type 2 diabetes delay starting insulin because they believe it means they've failed. That belief, according to a Duke Health endocrinologist, is possibly the most common and dangerous myth in diabetes care today, and it has a body count. A review published in Diabetes Spectrum found that when people put off insulin for just 1 year beyond when they clinically needed it, their risk of heart failure rose by 64%, heart attack by 67%, and stroke by 51%. Those aren't small numbers. Those are the kind of numbers that separate someone who lives independently into their 80s from someone who doesn't. And the reason this myth exists at all goes back decades, to a time when doctors waited far too long to prescribe insulin in the first place. By the time a patient finally started it, they were already dealing with kidney damage, vision loss, amputations. Their families watched them decline and made a connection that felt logical but was completely backwards. They thought the insulin caused the decline. In reality, years of uncontrolled blood sugar caused the decline, and insulin arrived too late to undo it. That association has been passed down through families like an heirloom nobody questioned. Parents told their children. Those children grew up, got diagnosed themselves, and refused the one thing that could have protected them because of a story they inherited from someone who simply didn't have the right information at the time. That myth alone has done more damage than most people realize, but it's far from the only one. There are beliefs about diabetes that millions of adults carry with them every day, beliefs that feel like common sense, beliefs they were told by people they trust, and some of those beliefs are actively making their health worse. So let's walk through the most dangerous ones, because understanding what's actually true might be the single most useful thing this video ever does. Let's start with the one that hurts the most, and I don't mean physically. The belief that you caused your own diabetes by eating too much sugar. If you've ever felt a wave of shame after your diagnosis, if a family member ever looked at your plate and said something that stung, if you've ever quietly blamed yourself for where you are right now, this part is for you. Sugar does not cause type 2 diabetes. The actual drivers are insulin resistance, genetics, age, inactivity, and long-term excess body weight. A diet loaded with sugar can contribute to weight gain. And weight gain raises risk, but there are people who eat sugar their entire lives and never develop diabetes, and there are people who barely touch it and still do. The relationship between sugar and diabetes is indirect, not causal, and the shame that comes from misunderstanding it is one of the biggest reasons people avoid seeking help. The CDC identifies diabetes stigma, including self-blame, as a genuine barrier to proper disease management. When someone believes they brought this on themselves, they're less likely to talk about it, less likely to ask for support, and more likely to hide their condition instead of managing it. Letting go of that blame doesn't change your diagnosis, but it changes how you respond to it, and that response is everything. Here's another one that catches people off guard. The idea that if you're thin, you're safe. Roughly 10 to 15% of people with type 2 diabetes have a normal body weight at the time of diagnosis. Harvard published research confirming that diabetes can hit hard even when the scale looks perfectly fine. The reason is visceral fat, the kind that wraps around your internal organs and doesn't show on the outside. You can look healthy, feel healthy, weigh exactly what you're supposed to weigh, and still have metabolic dysfunction happening beneath the surface. This is especially relevant for older adults who've gradually lost muscle mass over the years while gaining fat internally. The mirror and the scale both say everything's fine. The blood work tells a completely different story. And because thin people assume they're not at risk, they often delay screening by years, which means the disease progresses further before anyone catches it. Now here's one that affects how people eat every single day. The belief that all carbohydrates are the enemy and should be eliminated entirely. That sounds like discipline. It feels like taking control. And it's wrong. The American Diabetes Association, Diabetes Canada, and virtually every credible nutrition body says the same thing. Carbohydrates are an essential part of nutrition for people with diabetes. Whole grains are actually linked to lower diabetes risk in large population studies. The issue was never carbs as a category. The issue is refined carbs, added sugars, and eating starchy foods without fiber, protein, or fat to slow down the glucose absorption. When people cut carbs completely, they often end up exhausted, nutrient deficient, and on a path they can't sustain. And when they inevitably stop the restriction, they tend to rebound harder, gaining back more weight than they lost and feeling like they failed again. The goal was never zero carbs. The goal is the right carbs, in the right order, at the right time. And right alongside that one sits the myth about fruit. That fruit is dangerous for diabetics and should be avoided. Whole fruit contains fiber that slows the absorption of its natural sugars. It is fundamentally different from fruit juice, which strips out the fiber and delivers a concentrated sugar hit. Cleveland Clinic, Harvard, and the ADA have all published clear guidance confirming that whole fruit is safe and beneficial for people with diabetes. Berries, apples, pears, citrus, these are some of the most nutrient-dense foods available. And yet people with diabetes routinely eliminate them from their diets and replace them with processed snacks labeled sugar-free, which contain almost no nutritional value. The fear of fruit has quietly become one of the most common reasons diabetics eat poorly. They've removed the healthiest item on their plate and filled the gap with something worse. Here's one that's killing people through underestimation. The belief that diabetes isn't really that serious. The most recent CDC data listed diabetes as the 7th leading cause of death in the United States, with roughly 95,000 deaths per year. The World Health Organization reports it directly caused 1.6 million deaths globally in 2021, and nearly half of those deaths occurred before the age of 70. It causes more deaths annually than breast cancer and AIDS combined. It is the leading cause of kidney failure, non-traumatic lower limb amputations, and adult blindness. But because the damage accumulates slowly and invisibly, people treat it like a mild inconvenience. Family members say things like, "Lots of people have diabetes, you'll be fine." That kind of reassurance, offered with love, can be the most dangerous thing a person hears after a diagnosis, because it gives them permission to not take it seriously. Now here's the one that sounds responsible but does real harm. The belief that you should hold off on medication for as long as possible and try to manage things naturally first. That instinct comes from a place of independence and self-reliance, and for this audience in particular, it's deeply rooted. But a Duke endocrinologist put it plainly: the most important thing you can do is control your blood sugar. Every month spent with high glucose, while you're trying to handle it through willpower alone, is a month of damage to your blood vessels, your nerves, your kidneys, your eyes. The Diabetes Spectrum Review found that the average person waited 5 to 7 years before starting insulin, even after it was clinically indicated. During that window, their A1C levels were dangerously elevated, and the complications they were trying to avoid by delaying treatment were being caused by the delay itself. 75% of physicians surveyed admitted they would treat their patients more aggressively if it weren't for patient resistance. The resistance isn't stubbornness, it's fear, and the fear is based on myths that should have been corrected decades ago. This next one tricks people in the other direction. The belief that once your blood sugar numbers look good, the damage has stopped and you can ease up. By the time someone is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they've already lost 40 to 50% of the beta cells in their pancreas, the cells responsible for producing insulin. That loss happened silently over years before a single blood test raised a flag. And after diagnosis, beta cell function continues to decline at roughly 4 to 5% per year, even with proper treatment. Good blood sugar numbers mean your treatment plan is working, they do not mean the disease has gone away. When people see normal readings and decide to skip an appointment, reduce their medication, or stop monitoring, they're not responding to recovery. They're letting the scaffolding hold while they remove the foundation. The numbers look stable because the interventions are keeping them stable. Take the interventions away and the numbers will follow. Which brings us to the word people most want to hear and most need to understand correctly: cure. The idea that type 2 diabetes can be cured. Remission is real. The Newcastle Direct trial demonstrated that 46% of participants achieved remission at 1 year through significant weight loss. Yale research confirmed that even a 10% reduction in body weight can reverse insulin resistance. That is genuinely hopeful and worth pursuing. But at the 5-year mark in the same trial, only 13% remained in remission. The rest had relapsed. The word cure implies permanence, a finish line, a moment where you're done. Diabetes remission doesn't work that way. It requires the same vigilance, the same dietary awareness, the same physical activity indefinitely. People who achieve remission and then relax because they believe they've been cured often return to where they started, sometimes in worse condition because they stopped monitoring entirely. Remission is a destination worth reaching. It is not a place where you get to stop walking. And the last one is the myth that holds all the others in place. The belief that diabetes is simply what happens when you get old. It's true that age is a risk factor, but diabetes is not an inevitability of aging. There are people in their 80s and 90s who have never developed it. Framing diabetes as a natural part of decline gives people permission to stop fighting it, to stop preventing it, to see management as pointless resistance against something that was always going to happen. That framing is wrong, and it's dangerous, because the moment someone accepts a disease as fate, they stop making the choices that could change their outcome. And the data actually runs the opposite direction from what people expect. A study of 1.3 million people found that younger onset type 2 diabetes is more aggressive, with higher mortality risk, than diabetes diagnosed later in life. Age of onset matters more than age itself, and the disease is now rising fastest among adults under 40. This was never an old person's disease. It was always a metabolic disease. And metabolic diseases respond to what you do about them, regardless of how old you are when you start. Every one of these myths started somewhere reasonable: a worried parent, an outdated textbook, a doctor who meant well but didn't have the latest evidence. They were passed down not out of carelessness but out of love, fear, and the deeply human need to make sense of a diagnosis that felt overwhelming. But carrying a myth forward doesn't protect you. It delays the decisions that actually do, and the distance between what most people believe about diabetes and what the science actually shows is, in many cases, the exact distance between getting worse and getting better.